The whisper traveled down the firing line like a virus. "How's a guy with no legs going to teach us anything about fieldcraft?" Private Dawson smirked at the recruit beside him, watching the wheelchair navigate the uneven terrain of the sniper range. Staff Sergeant William Ghost Thornton had arrived at the Army marksmanship unit with a custom chair, a weathered rifle case, and 2 empty pant legs pinned neatly below the knee. The cadets saw a broken man clinging to relevance. Then Thornton wheeled himself to the firing platform, transferred to a prone mat with practiced efficiency, settled behind a Barrett M82, and sent a round downrange without ceremony. The spotter called it hit, center mass, 1,800 meters. The range went silent. Thornton didn't look up from his scope. Legs are for walking to the position. Eyes, breath, and patience are for making the shot. Anyone else have questions about my qualifications? If you believe precision requires no standing, comment honor below. Staff Sergeant William Thornton rolled into Fort Benning Sniper School on a Georgia morning so humid the air felt like cloth. His wheelchair was a custom job. Lightweight titanium frame, oversized wheels for rough terrain, modifications that suggested years of adaptation to environments never designed for him. The students assigned to his long-range marksmanship course watched him approach with expressions ranging from confusion to barely concealed disdain. These were soldiers who'd already passed the grueling selection process, who considered themselves elite, who'd trained their bodies into instruments of precision and endurance. Their instructor couldn't walk to the latrine without assistance. The cognitive dissonance was visible on their faces. How could a man who couldn't perform a basic movement teach them the most demanding shooting discipline in military service? Thornton read their doubt the way he read wind patterns, automatically, instinctively, with the cold assessment of someone who'd spent a lifetime measuring variables that others missed. The classroom sessions did nothing to ease their skepticism. Thornton taught ballistics theory from behind a desk, his wheelchair positioned where he could see every face. His lectures were thorough. Windage calculations, Coriolis effect, mirage reading, the mathematics of bullet drop over extreme distances. He drew diagrams, cited physics, explained the minute adjustments that separated a hit from a miss at ranges where the Earth's rotation became a factor. But the cadets heard theory without demonstration, concepts without proof. During breaks, they gathered in clusters and voiced what they wouldn't say directly. "He probably hasn't fired a shot since he lost his legs," Private Morrison speculated. "They gave him the teaching job out of pity." 1,800 meters, Dawson scoffed, referencing the shot they'd witnessed on day 1. Probably had it pre-sighted. No way he actually made that cold. They constructed narratives that preserved their assumptions, stories where Thornton was a charity case rather than an authority. They had no idea they were about to be educated. The first range day began with Thornton demonstrating his transfer technique, the process of moving from wheelchair to prone position. The cadets watched, expecting awkwardness, struggle, the humiliation of a man fighting a body that no longer cooperated. What they saw instead was economy of motion refined through thousands of repetitions. Thornton locked his wheels, gripped the mat, swung his truncated legs clear, and lowered himself into a shooting position in under 4 seconds. His upper body, they now noticed, was disproportionately powerful. Shoulders and arms developed to compensate for everything his legs no longer provided. He settled behind his rifle with the comfort of a man returning to a favorite chair. "Shooting position is about stability," he said, his eye never leaving the scope. "Legs are one way to achieve it, not the only way, not even the best way." He adjusted his position minutely, his abbreviated body forming a surprisingly solid platform. "I don't shift my weight anymore. I don't get muscle fatigue in my calves. Every disadvantage, properly understood, becomes advantage. Watch." The shot that followed was not the pre-sighted performance the cadets had convinced themselves they'd witnessed on day 1. Thornton called for a target at 1,200 meters, a standard long-range distance well within the envelope of his rifle. He didn't take the shot immediately. Instead, he narrated his process, explaining each variable as he accounted for it. Wind speed and direction, read from grass movement and mirage shimmer. Temperature and humidity, affecting air density. The slight uphill angle, requiring adjustment for gravity's reduced effect on the ascending bullet. The cadets listened to calculations that would have taken them minutes, delivered in seconds. Then Thornton's finger moved, the rifle spoke, and the spotter confirmed. Hit, 1 inch left of center. He cycled the bolt without looking up. Again. 4 more shots, 4 more hits, a grouping that could have been covered by a playing card, at 1,200 meters, in variable wind, from a wheelchair user lying on a mat. The whispers stopped. The story of how Thornton lost his legs emerged gradually, shared not by him but by Sergeant Major Costa, his spotter for the past 8 years. Helmand Province, 2012. Thornton had been providing overwatch for a convoy moving through Taliban-controlled territory. His position was compromised, someone had sold their location, and mortar fire began walking toward his hide site. A lesser sniper would have displaced immediately. Thornton stayed on the scope because the convoy was still in the kill zone, because enemy fighters were massing for an ambush, because his rifle was the only thing preventing a massacre. He called shots for 11 minutes while mortars crept closer. He killed 14 enemy combatants, broke the ambush, saved 37 American lives. The round that finally found him landed 3 meters away. The shrapnel took both legs below the knee and peppered his lower back with fragments that surgeons spent 9 hours removing. His first words upon waking were a question about the convoy. When told everyone survived, he closed his eyes and said, "Worth it?" The Army offered him a medical discharge. He requested reassignment to instructor duty. It took 2 years of fighting, but he won. The training intensified through the following weeks, and Thornton drove them mercilessly. He couldn't demonstrate stalking exercises, the fieldcraft of moving into position undetected, but he designed courses that exposed every flaw in their technique, observing from elevated positions where his wheelchair could access. He spotted movement the cadets thought invisible, called out errors they didn't know they'd made, demanded repetition until concealment became instinct. On the range, he shot alongside them, matching his abbreviated body against their whole ones, consistently outperforming soldiers 30 years younger with all their limbs intact. His patience became legendary. He would wait motionless for hours, watching conditions, refusing to take a shot until variables aligned perfectly. Sniping is not about pulling triggers, he told them. It's about waiting until the trigger pull is inevitable. The shot should be finished before you fire it. If you're uncertain when you press, you've already missed. The cadets absorbed his philosophy, recognizing finally that legs had nothing to do with the discipline they were learning. The qualification exercise came in week 6, the culmination of everything they'd learned. Each cadet would engage targets at increasing distances, finishing with an 1,800-meter shot that represented the outer edge of their rifle's effective range. Success required hitting at least 80% of targets, including the final long-range engagement. Failure meant recycling through the course, a humiliation none of them wanted to face. Thornton monitored from the observation tower, his scope tracking each shooter's performance, his voice occasionally crackling through the radio with corrections or encouragement. The cadets performed well. His training had been thorough, but as the distances extended, anxiety crept in. The 1,800-meter shot loomed like a final exam where the questions might be in a foreign language. When Private Dawson, the most vocal early skeptic, took position for his final engagement, his hands were trembling visibly. Thornton's voice came through the earpiece. "Dawson, stop thinking about the distance. The rifle doesn't know how far the target is. Your job is the same at 1,800 as it was at 300. Eyes, breath, patience. Take your time. The shot is already made." Dawson steadied. His breathing slowed. Crosshairs settled on a steel silhouette so distant it was barely visible to the naked eye. He processed variables the way Thornton had taught: wind, elevation, Coriolis, the rotation of the Earth itself becoming a factor in his calculations. Time stretched. The world narrowed to the circle of his scope. When his finger finally moved, he barely felt it, the trigger brake surprising him exactly as it should, the shot releasing itself rather than being forced. The rifle kicked. The round traveled for nearly 3 seconds, crossing distance that seemed impossible, bending with the wind, dropping with gravity, adjusting for planetary spin. The spotter's voice crackled. "Hit! Dawson qualifies." The cheer from the other cadets was immediate, but Dawson stayed on the scope, his eye fixed on the target he'd just struck. He understood now what Thornton had meant. The shot had been finished before he fired it. The trigger pull was just confirmation. He finally knew what it meant to be a sniper. Graduation day brought families to Fort Benning, parents and spouses and children watching their soldiers receive the crossed rifles of the sniper qualification badge. Staff Sergeant Thornton positioned his wheelchair at the edge of the ceremony, content to observe from the periphery, his role complete. But the cadets had planned otherwise. Class Leader Morrison, the same soldier who'd speculated about pity assignments weeks earlier, approached the microphone during the open remarks section. "Before we receive our badges," he said, "our class wants to recognize the instructor who taught us that sniping isn't about bodies. It's about minds." He turned toward Thornton. "Staff Sergeant, would you join us?" Thornton wheeled forward, uncertain, his expression guarded. The cadets had pooled their money to commission a plaque, a brass rectangle mounted on oak, engraved with a rifle and the words, "To the ghost who taught us to shoot. Legs are for walking. The shot is everything." Below it, each of their names and a final line. 100% qualification rate. First in course history. Thornton held the plaque in his lap, his fingers tracing the engraving, his throat working around words that wouldn't come immediately. Finally, he looked up at the formation of soldiers who doubted him 6 weeks ago. Soldiers who now carried skills he'd given them, philosophy he'd instilled, patience he'd demanded until it became part of them. "I lost my legs in a place most Americans can't find on a map," he said. "I kept them in jars for a while. The doctors let me, until I realized I was holding on to something that didn't matter." A few uncertain laughs, but Thornton's expression remained serious. "What matters is what you do with what remains. I have eyes that can read wind at 2,000 meters, lungs that can hold steady when everything depends on stillness, fingers that know exactly how much pressure a trigger needs." He lifted the plaque slightly. "And now I have this. Proof that what I have is enough. Proof that what you have is enough, whatever pieces might be missing." He set the plaque in his lap and straightened, his bearing military perfect despite the chair. "You're snipers now. Go make shots that matter. And remember, the only part of your body the bullet cares about is the finger that sends it." Years passed, and the snipers Thornton trained scattered across the world's conflict zones. They made shots in Afghanistan and Syria and places whose names remained classified. They saved lives from distances the enemy thought impossible, disappeared into terrain and emerged only through the impact of their rounds. Some of them became instructors themselves, passing on techniques they'd learned from a legless sergeant who shot better than anyone they'd ever met. When they told stories to their own students, Thornton's name surfaced like legend. The ghost who could hit an 1,800-meter target from a wheelchair, who'd lost his legs saving a convoy, who taught that sniping was eyes and breath and patience and nothing else. Dawson eventually returned to Fort Benning as a senior instructor, and he kept a photo on his office wall, the graduation class surrounding Thornton's wheelchair, every face showing the respect that had replaced their early contempt. When young soldiers asked about the man in the chair, Dawson would smile and say, "That's the best sniper I ever met. He taught me that the bullet doesn't care what you're missing. It only cares that you don't miss."